Alright, so today I'll take a look at all the new Planeswalkers we got from War of the Spark. Now, there are quite a few of them, so this might take some time. As always, I'm gonna look at this from a competitive viewpoint, so a few of the cards that I'm gonna say meh are still usable and you can certainly have fun with them, but they are not like cards you're gonna include in a tier 1 deck. Anyway, let's get started, and let's start with Gideon Blackblade. Now, this Planeswalker is amazing. For 3 mana, you get a Planeswalker that has indestructibility and turns into a creature on your turn and prevents all damage that will be dealt to Gideon Blackblade during your turn. So this one is really amazing. Now, obviously, his weaknesses are Vraska's Contempt or anything that can exile him, as well as things that can give him minus. Minus gets around indestructibility because you're not actually damaging them with damage, you're just giving them flat out minus stats. So that is one way, or 2 ways to deal with him. 4+1, he gives another creature lifelink, indestructibility, and vigilance. It's just amazing. Play a Daunted Vanguard on turn 2, play Gideon on turn 3, and laugh all the way to the bank. It is just that amazing. And of course, -6, he gets to exile anything that's not a land, and of course doesn't have hexproof. Again, 3 to 4 copies, this is just such an amazing card. And of course, once rotation occurs, this can replace History of Benalia. I mean, what else is there to say about it other than, yeah, if you're gonna play white and you're gonna play creatures, this is a creature or Planeswalker that you really want. There's no higher praise I can give it to it. Next up we have the Shield Mage. This one is meh, it's just an uncommon, and yeah, overall not that good. 3 mana, you get hexproof. What more is there to say? You can also make a token, however the token doesn't have reach, and there are so many flying things in standard at the moment that the token doesn't really matter. Blue will just fly over him, Hydrocrasis will fly over him, Drakes will fly over him, like Goblin Chainwhirler will kill you all. There's just nothing good about this card whatsoever. And of course, if you do play against mono red, well, you're gonna have a Chainwhirler probably facing you, and you know, it's just gonna be misery for you. Let's move on to the next one, and this is gonna be the Wanderer. This one is another meh. 4 mana, it prevents all non-combat damage to you and your permanents, but that's where the good ends. It's too expensive for what it does. I mean, would you play this or play a Wrath Effect or a Conclave? There's just so many better things you can do with your mana to make this worthwhile. Let's move on to the second version of Gideon, and this one is not as good as the first one. I mean, I don't think we had 2 Planeswalkers in the same set that have been top tier, and this is the case once again with the second version of Gideon. He is a bit too expensive at 6 mana, and his passive allows him to put +1/+1 counters on up to 2 creatures, but it requires you to attack with 2 or more creatures, and his ability that turns him into a creature doesn't count, so it's overall just a very meh card for 6 mana. Anyway, let's move over to the first blue card, and here we have the Narset. Now, this one is actually really good. Each opponent can't draw more than 1 card each turn. Now, this is obviously mostly going to be used for mirror matches. As you should know, when it comes to high level control matches, it's pretty much whoever managed to draw the most cards and have the most mana is the one that's going to win, as well as whoever plays the first cards in the late game tends to lose. I mean, in a control mirror, there's pretty much only late game. I would certainly play this in a control mirror matchup, and being only an uncommon, it's not gonna break anyone's bank to actually craft this particular card. But again, against anything that's not a control deck, or if you only play best of 1, then I can't see you ever having to use this card. But in a best of 3, this is something I would definitely consider using. Let's move on to, well, this thing. This is probably, I mean, this is not going to be a tier 1 meta deck card, but for casual queue and for messing around, this card is actually quite great. It allows you to win if you're not able to draw any more cards, and his ultimates allow you to draw 7 cards, and if you don't have any cards in your library after drawing those 7 cards, you also win the game. Overall, you can play this with, well, your standard discard blue deck. I mean, what can I say? It's not going to be tier 1 viable, but it's certainly going to ruin the casual queue for anyone who faces it. And if you really hate every other person in the game, go and add this into a green-blue fog deck and watch as you get roped in every single game. I don't know what to say about this. Craft it if you want to ruin other people's fun in quick queue, and that's about it. Anyway, let's move over to the Mentor. This one is really meh. For 4 mana, you give your creatures and your Planeswalkers Spell Pierce, and that's about it. I mean, for 4 mana, you want to do so many other things. Like, let's say you are playing Mono Blue. For 4 mana, what could you do? You could play a Tempest Djinn and actually have a Spell Pierce up, or you could play or buff your Drake on the field and have draw power and maybe a counterspell in your hand. Like, it has so many more options that you can use for 4 mana that you couldn't. I would never see a situation where you want to play this particular card. I mean, that's one thing that I tried to hammer home to a newer player, and that is that always look at what else you could do for the same mana when you're trying to evaluate a card. Not evaluate, evaluate. That's the word. For example, a card might look amazing, then you realize, oh, I could play Chaos Wrath for the same mana cost, or I could play this card that kills 1 creature. What am I gonna do? But yeah, overall, this is another card you can skip, but being only an uncommon, it's not gonna be like the end of the world seeing you opening this. Anyway, let's move over to the second version of Jace, and if you do open this one, you are gonna cry a bit. For 6 mana, you get to +1, draw a card, for -7 loyalty, or your creatures become unblockable. This is completely unplayable. Let's move on to our first black, and this is gonna be Davriel something. This one is really meh. If your opponent has less than 1 card in their hand, he pings for 2, and you can force your opponent to discard a card, and that's about it. It's not that good. You could play Mind Rot for 3 mana, which would be a lot better, really. Anyway, let's move on to Obnixis, and this one is kinda meh. 5 mana, you get a pinger that deals 1 damage whenever your opponent draws a card. And you can force him to draw a card by using the ability. You get to destroy a target creature, but he gets to draw 2 cards. I mean, for 5 mana, you kill a creature and your opponent gets to draw 2 cards. Oh, and you ping him for 2. Just very meh. Let's move on to Liliana. Now, this one I have mixed feelings about. The passive is kind of whatever. Her +1 is not that relevant, sadly, because there are still so many great things that are flying around. It makes the zombie kind of useless. I mean, this is a card that if you're already winning hard, you win harder, but you don't need her to make a deck, so I can't recommend you actually crafting this one. Now, her second ability is really good. Each player sacrifices 2 creatures. This can get around hexproof, but apart from that, this card doesn't really offer anything. Now, her ultimate does kind of win you the game. It forces your opponent to sacrifice everything pretty much, even lands. He gets to keep 1 land. However, it would take you forever to actually get to this point, and if you do manage to get to this point, there are so many other ways you could win with, so I would not bother to actually waste a wild card on this particular card as of right now. Eventually it might get good once rotation occurs and stuff like that. Let's move on to our first red card, and here we're gonna have the Instigator. This one is really meh. It's too expensive for what it does. If lifelink or life gain ever becomes meta, sure, this is gonna be usable, but until then, this is just... I mean, for 3 mana, you could play a Chain Whirler instead, or just bolt them in their face. Now, Chandra kinda has the issue that she shares the mana cost with a lot of other great things at 4, such as Rekindling Phoenix and Experimental Frenzy, making this a very questionable choice to include in stuff like Red Deck Wins or any black red decks. Overall, this is a card you can certainly skip. However, she's not bad, there are just better things right now. Let's move on to Jaya, And this one, again, this is too expensive for what it does, and I'm not even gonna waste any more time on it, sadly. Now, the same thing could be said about Sarkhan. The passive is just very bad. It pings attacking creatures for 1, but you need dragons out to do it. And overall, the card is just too slow to actually be usable. And sadly, it is a rare card. So unless you're looking for some Mimi Dragon Tribe deck, this is a card you can certainly skip. Now, the Wildcrafter is kind of interesting. Each creature you control with a counter, well, a +1/+1 counter, allows you to tap for 1 additional mana of any color. Now, this is quite good. You can play a Llanowar Elf turn 1 and then play the Wildcrafter turn 2. However, as of right now, there are other great things that you probably want to include instead, but the card is not bad. You could play this and could probably go quite far with it. And being only an uncommon, it's not like you're gonna break the bank actually crafting this. So yeah, this one you could have fun with actually, and even make slightly competitive. Now, on you, Vivian Reed is quite amazing. Just like the Wildcrafter, she can come out on turn 2 with a Llanowar Elf, and her passive is amazing. It gives all your creatures flash. This is a really amazing card, and certainly if you like playing creatures and green, I would recommend this card, and I would probably go as many copies as 3 to 4, depending on what kind of deck you want to make. Overall, this card is a really good card, and I can really recommend it. 4+1, one of your creatures gets reach and vigilance until the next turn, which is amazing because it can actually deal with a lot of the flying stuff that we currently have in the standard. And for -2, you get to search your top 3 for a creature card. Well, you get to search your top 3 and exile one of them, and if it is a creature card, you can cast it whenever you have the mana. Obviously, the cards that you don't exile gets to the bottom, but overall, it's a really good card. Let's move on to something that's not as great, and that is Nissa. I'm not gonna go over the card. It's basically allows you to have fun with lands. You can make Mimi land decks, and that's about it. It's not gonna be a meta card, so it's not gonna be anything I'm gonna spend too much time talking about. It's not like the Vivian, I was gonna say Vivian Reed, but the Vivian Champion of the Wild. But if you want to have fun with lands, you can certainly use Nissa. However, for most of you, I think you would prefer opening Vivians. Let's move on to the voice of the pack. This one is meh, but once again, this is an uncommon, so it's not like you're gonna cry when you open it. It's not a Mythic Jace where you actually might cry when you actually open that one. And now we have our first multicolor card, and it's gonna be Dovin. This one is kind of interesting. I could see this as a sideboard card against Drakes and Phoenixes, more so Phoenixes. The passive ability forces your opponent's artifacts, instant, and sorcery spell to cost 1 more. However, it would be kind of hard to know when to cast it, but I could see it working. But being only uncommon, once again, you're not going to break the bank, but this one could potentially see a little bit of play, but it's not the greatest thing in the world, and if it ever saw play, it will probably be in the sideboard. Anyway, we've finally come to this. I can't believe they actually printed this. Well, I can't believe whoever came up with this idea didn't get laughed out of the office. Everyone pretty much hated to play against Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. And now we're getting this. I guess Teferi is the new Planeswalker to really hate. It has the most offensive passive ability in the entire game. And when I mean offensive, I mean offensive to anyone who likes Legacy. Each opponent can cast spells only anytime they could cast a sorcery. What were they thinking? I mean, this card is just frustrating to read. It is obviously, when it comes to Legacy, I mean, they hate Legacy. Well, they don't hate Legacy, they just don't care about Legacy. But in Legacy, this just... In Standard, it's not as game-breaking, but still... I don't know. If you hate people, sure, you could craft this card. It's not bad, it's amazing. It's a bit better in Eternal formats or older formats. In Standard, as it currently is, it's not the most amazing card yet, but once rotation occurs, you're probably gonna see a lot of this. There are more things I want to say about it, but they are probably not very YouTube friendly. So let's move on to Sorin. Now this one is kinda meh. It is playable if you want to have a bit of fun, but overall I would not be happy opening this unless I just want to make casual decks. Anyway, let's move on to Kea, Bane of the Dead. This one could be... It's hard to evaluate this one. The ability or a possibility is really good. It allows you to go through hexproof, but it's also a 6 mana summoning cost. You can also exile target creature, so you can in theory play this then exile that annoying dino that's standing in the way. But 6 mana makes it hard to justify it, but the card is certainly good. This is a card I would probably look out for. It could be actually playable in tier 1 decks, probably only as a 1 or 2 copies, but the card is not bad. However, I would not say that it's gonna be like... It's not gonna be a meta-defining card like Hero of Dominaria, but the card is not bad, but it is a bit expensive for what it does, and there are cheaper ways to go around hexproof. But the card is not horrible, and being only an uncommon is not gonna be breaking your bank. Let's move on to quite an interesting card, and it's gonna be the Dream Render. The passive is quite good. Spells and abilities your opponents control can't cast their control to search a library. It is not that important in Standard at the moment, but it's not a bad ability. The -1 is just your standard mill ability, but it is that passive ability that is quite interesting. However, as it stands right now, it's not that useful, but it could become quite relevant later on. But I don't know, I would not recommend you crafting her right now, her, but overall the card is not bad. It just doesn't have a designated target as of right now. Anyway, let's move on to Tezzeret. Sadly, this one is a bit too expensive. For 6 mana, your creatures and spells gains affinity for artifacts, but that's pretty much where the fun stops. His +2 gives him ping or dealing X equal to the number of artifacts you control, but it's a bit too expensive, and if you have enough artifacts to make this work in Standard, you are probably already won the game. So again, it's one of those you win more, just as with Liliana. With his -3 ability, you get to return an artifact to your hand, kinda meh. And his ultimate is also kinda meh. You exile the top 10 cards, any artifacts gets to be put on the battlefield that you found in the top 10. Overall, this is another card I would not be too happy opening. Although it's not the Jace situation, I could certainly use this in a fun artifact deck, but for tier 1 decks, this is certainly not a game changer. Let's move to the first blue-red Planeswalker in this set, and this one is actually quite interesting. It gives you a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token whenever you cast a non-creature spell. So if you play a burn control deck, which is certainly playable in the current environment, this one could see play. It's not bad, it has a reasonable mana cost, and overall, I don't know. If you want to play that control deck that is more focused on burn, or burning opponent to death rather than just controlling and then eventually resolving a big creature, I could certainly see use for this card, and being only uncommon, you're not gonna break the bank. Let's move on to Ral. Now Ral is kinda bad, he's just too expensive. For 4 mana you get a questionable passive, you can scry for +2 loyalty, and for -2 you can copy your next instant or sorcery spell, but the mana cost is just too high. The Drake deck that would be his natural fit is already really stretched when it comes to cards, and you certainly can't fit Ral into it. Let's move to a really forgettable card, and that's gonna be Angrath. For 4 mana, your creature has menace and you can amass 2. For fun decks, sure, it's only uncommon, but for anything else, this is never gonna see play. It is just not good enough, sadly. Right, so let's move to another forgettable card, and that's gonna be another version of Vraska. Whenever a creature you control with Death Touch deal damage to a player or planeswalker, put a +1/1 counter on that creature for 4 mana. The passive is just meh, and the -2 you get to make an assassin that your opponents are gonna be forced to block, but you know, it's a 1/1. In a competitive environment, this is not gonna be playable. Let's move on to a really good card, and that's gonna be Domeri. First off, it gives all your creatures +1 flat, and for the +1 loyalty ability, you get a mountain or a forest, and all your creatures cannot be countered after this. This is a really good card, and I would certainly recommend at least 3 copies if you're gonna play a creature-heavy deck, and I don't know, I cannot give it higher praise. This is a really playable card. I mean, most of the cards we have looked at so far are either really questionable or very situational, with only a couple of cards that I would really say are gonna be tier 1 defining or support tier 1 decks, and this is one of them. But yeah, it's a really good card. Anyway, let's move over to a card that is nowhere near as good, and that's gonna be the Smasher. It gives your creatures haste for 4 mana, and the loyalty ability allows you to give them haste again and give them +2/+1, plus allowing you to scry. Overall, the card is just very forgettable. Let's move on to Storm of the Stone. Sadly, this is a bit too expensive, because otherwise it could be playable. It gives all your creatures first strike on your turn, and equip abilities you activate cost 1 less to activate. Sadly, the 4 mana cost kinda ruins it. If it was cheaper, like say 3 maybe, but as it stands, I would not say it's playable, but it was really close to actually being good. Next up, we have a really forgettable card, and that's gonna be the Sun Heart. It allows your creatures to deal damage with their defense, and that's about it. It's not very good. Limited, sure. In competitive environment, you're never gonna see this unless we get some amazing defensive creatures with high toughness, and of course being very cheap, which pretty much never really happens. Alright, so we have finally reached Ajani. 4/+1 loyalty, you gain 3 life, mainly there just to raise the loyalty. Now the -2 is quite good. Problem is we still have the other Ajani, the Tyrant one, still in standard. So this one is kind of being overshadowed by that one, because here you gonna get minus to give all your creatures +1/+1 counter. I mean, obviously this card is tailored for token decks, but as it stands, token decks are stretched so thin that they're not gonna be able to fit this one in until at least rotation occurs. I mean, once rotation occurs, I'm gonna say this card is gonna be playable, but until then, you can pretty much forget this one exists. Now, if you do like to play tokens, this is an option if you can't afford all the mythic cards you're required for creating the token deck, but until rotation occurs, this is not gonna be a meta-defining card or a deck-defining card, but you're probably not going to be unhappy opening the card. Let's move on to a very questionable Planeswalker. This one allows you to draw a card if you summon a creature with 4 more attack, and that's about it. Oh, and you can untap a permanent. Overall, just very forgettable. Now this next card is quite interesting, even quite good. However, it's quite conditional. As long as this card is on the board, you can no longer be forced to sacrifice creatures or discard cards from your hand. It's more of a sideboard card, but it's very good for what it does. I would certainly not be unhappy owning like 2 copies of this if I play Sultai and best of 3s, but outside of that I would not recommend a card. Anyway, we have reached our 3 final cards. First off, we have Nicholas Bolas, the Dragon God. This one is kinda meh. Obviously, if you make some super meme deck with a lot of Planeswalkers, you want to include this. but you're never going to spend mythic wildcards to craft this unless you have nothing else to spend them on, or if you just like making really wacky deck and have no problem using mythic wildcards on questionable cards. Second to last, we have Karn. This one is questionable. The passive is quite good but very conditional. Active abilities of artifacts your opponent control can't be activated, so if they play artifact, they are kinda completely screwed. But other than that, the passive doesn't do much. +1 is kinda meh as well. It turns any artifact into a creature where its power and toughness is equal to its converted mana cost. But overall, there are not that many things, or there are not that many artifacts in current standard that you could even turn into a usable creature. And of course, the -2 is also, well, it's a bit weird. You may choose an artifact card you own from outside the game or in exile, reveal that card and put it into your hand. Now, this could synergize with your other Karn, assuming you're out of your other Karn or you can't retrieve your exiled cards. But apart from that, this one is not gonna see much play. It's just a bit too conditional. And overall, 4 mana for the second ability is just not worth it, unless it's like your last card that you need to win the game. Alright, so the final card we're gonna talk about, or the final Planeswalker we're gonna talk about, is gonna be Ujin. Sadly, this one is way too expensive to ever think about unless you once again do something fun, but for a tier 1 meta deck, I would never craft this. 6 mana, all colorless spells you cast cost 2 less. And I'm not really gonna talk about the abilities either, they're just not very good when you're looking at a competitive standpoint. Anyway, before I conclude this video, I'm just gonna go over once again very fast and highlight the cards that I consider to be worthy a craft. So first off, we have Gideon Blackblade. I would say 3 to 4 copies. The next card I would recommend would be Narset, only if you're playing Control and playing best of 3s, because you would put this in the sideboard. And I would recommend about 2 to 3 copies, probably only 2, but it is only an uncommon, and once again, it's only if you play Control. Next up, I would recommend the first version of Jace if you play Mill and hate other players, or if you play Fog and really hate everyone, then you could have some fun, but otherwise, I would say meh. I would not recommend Liliana, she's just too expensive. If you open her, sure, you could probably use her, but there are better cards. The next recommendation would be, let's see, where are you? That would be Vivian, Champion of the Wild. This one is really good. At turn 2, if you have a Llanowar Elf turn 1, you can give all your creatures flash. It is just really amazing. The next card I would recommend would be Teferi, Time Reveler. Sadly, this card was printed. Obviously, this is going to be for Control players. And I would recommend 3 copies. Obviously, once rotation occurs, you probably want to go up to 4 to replace Hero of Dominaria. But overall, this is a card I would recommend, but only if you are a die-hard Control player. As of right now, it's not required, but in the future, it probably is going to be required. Right, so next up is going to be, let's see. There are not that many good cards, sadly. Not that many good Planeswalker in this set. Next up is going to be this Domeri. Just as with Vivian, this one is really good. You can play it on turn 2 together with a Llanowar Elf. And of course, once you use the +1 loyalty, all your creatures are immune to counters. So that is quite amazing. The next recommendation would be the Collector of Tales, but only if you play Sultai and only if you play best of 3s. Outside of that, I cannot see a great use of this card. The abilities are still good without the passive, but you mainly would include this for the ability that it has. And finally, I would not recommend any of these cards unless you want to just have fun. But once again, this video is mainly about tier 1 decks or cards that I would consider really good to craft for the future. Oh, I did kind of miss, where did you go? This version of Ajani. For the future, I would certainly say this is going to be used, but right now, the token decks doesn't have any room for him. But this is a card you will not be unhappy opening. And that is going to conclude this video. I hope you all have enjoyed it. I certainly have enjoyed it to some degree, although my voice is about to give out. I'm not sure if you can actually hear it, but I can certainly feel it. Oh, and I did also manage to bite myself in the cheek earlier today, so it's been actually quite painful talking for the last, well, this recording is going to take forever to edit, but for the last hour or so. So that's going to conclude this video. I now have to go and see if the very angry Hornet has decided to move out of the house. Otherwise I'm going to have to deal with him/her. Anyway guys, I catch you tomorrow when I'm going to talk about the mythic cards. Laters, this is Project signing out.